This is Bricks and Clicks, where Cliff Hudson and Craig Miller explore the real conversations and innovative strategies with industry leaders behind transforming legacy brands for long-term sustainable growth in the digital age.
Welcome to Bricks and Clicks. Very good to be with you. I'm Cliff Hudson, former CEO of Sonic Corp. With me is my friend and former coworker, Craig Miller. Craig spent several years as the Chief Information Officer for Planet Fitness, and before that, quite a few years as in the same capacity for Sonic. So a lot of wonderful experience the two of us have had, and hopefully you've enjoyed these first 8 or so podcasts you've listened to of Bricks and Clicks. Today, we're going to be talking about something of a synopsis of our experience in building, well, in that case, was integrated customer engagement in our years together at Sonic, but also a synopsis for our book, Bricks and Clicks. This is not though it is a synopsis, not the end of the podcast. It's kind of a point in time covering these first number of podcasts, and we'll continue on with other inquiries as it relates to the use of technology and brand building and how that differs in the 21st century versus so many of our experiences in the 20th. There are a number of things that we hope you kind of take away, Craig and I, comparing our notes for these first several podcasts. We hope you would take away from having listened to Bricks and Clicks. And one of the first, we've got about 5 points we want to cover here today. One of the first of which is appropriate for a synopsis, you might say, is at the end of the day, we're both of the view that it's really about creating value for the consumer and doing so in such a way that it drives top-line growth for your enterprise, but also driving profit for the concept operator, whether it's a single enterprise, a franchise group, or however that works. I think that this is a focus for us because it was over our years in business in each of the enterprises we've been involved in. But certainly that's one I can quantify as it relates for Sonic. Many of you may have heard me mention before that 2 years into my term as CEO of Sonic, 1997 is when Sonic hit $1 billion in system-wide sales for the first time. And innovation had historically been a big part of the game with Sonic, and it continued to be because it was in 96 that we rolled out Frozen and Fountain Favorites profits. So you had top line and bottom line growth with that innovation. Profits exploded, and so did same-store sales and new store openings. So that even though it took Sonic 44 years to hit $1 billion in $1 billion in system-wide sales, 44 years from 53 to 97. It only took 4 years to hit that second billion, to go from 1 billion to 2 billion. And then interestingly enough, with more innovation, our pays units, our rollout of breakfast, and more different kinds of marketing, the two guys and so on, another 4 years, we hit yet another billion for 3 billion in sales by 2005. With some other challenges along the way, when the company was sold in 2018, the system was doing about 4.5 billion in sales. And with the initiatives we had underway, particularly as it relates to integrated customer engagement, and more importantly, national cable, mobile app, mobile order, mobile pay, by 2020, 2021, it was clear that the system had hit about 5.5 billion, was pushing towards 6 billion. So innovation, very much the order of the day, and focus on not just innovation for the sake of innovation, but something that aided the customer significantly and yet drove both top and bottom line for the concept operator. And I know, Craig, this has been a big part of your career as well, including your most recent position with Planet Fitness. But I think as a theme you've reminded me of a number of times. So your thoughts there?
I would tell you that typically when I'm called and asked to kind of help think about technology strategies, whether working full-time or in a consulting capacity, the first thing anyone wants to talk about is the tech. And I really try to get them to think very differently and say, let's hold off on the tech. Let's first talk about your customer. Let's talk about your sales and profit, which is universal for any business, of course. That's the starting point. That typically will always at least get us started to have the discussion in the right way. and then understand that then I could begin, once I understand, their business model, how they drive sales and profit, something about their customer, then we could talk about how this applies to their business and how we can essentially use technology as an enabler to drive top line and bottom line efficiencies. What I really was very excited about the first time you and I met, which I think we've talked about in a previous podcast, is our conversation was around technology, but you immediately took me within our first conversation to this idea that technology will allow us to learn more about our customers and engage with them better and more effectively. And that was the beginning of wanting to be part of the story and your vision. And so from a starting point, tech becomes an enabler. You really have to start with the customer, start with how your business model drives sales and profit. And what we've talked about and what we're going to frame out here in this conversation really applies. It's universal to any industry, in my experience. I've worked in multiple. And will continue to evolve as customers evolve and as technology evolves.
Great recollection there and weaving that in with the experience we've had between us, Craig, but then also the evolution, the focus of that going forward. And that kind of leads to a second sort of takeaway. It strikes me from the discussion here in our podcast, but broadly as it relates to industry and now in the 21st century, a number of industries. That is, though we had plenty of experience successfully building brands in the 20th century with limited use of technology at that time, it's really the second takeaway, I think, from hopefully someone listening to these podcasts would say is it's difficult to think about building a brand in the 21st century without it, but involving a serious application of technology, granted with the customer focus being the first piece. But anyone thinking about building a business, building a brand, certainly would have to be thinking about how technology plays in there for the consumer from an innovative sort of way. Maybe that's a given, but I'm not inviting a dissent because I'm sure there's not a dissent, Craig. But any thoughts on that? I think is a clear given.
Yes, two reasons, and it still drives back to 2 points. The reason, and rightfully so, it's hard to imagine growing any business 21st century without technology is, two things happened and has been happening. One is the evolution of technology becoming more and more of a part of the business model. Prior to 2001, you'd find larger companies that had big mainframes in their back office. That was 70s into the 80s. Then the advent of the PC, so technology started to push into the front office. In the 90s, you started to see laptops and networking. Now technology is pushing to the field. And ultimately, with the advent and adoption of mobile web and a connected world, it's now in the hands of our customers. So you see this kind of evolution. And in the 21st century, it'd be really difficult to improve your business and engagement with consumers because that's where consumers were going. They were using the web in the early 2000s, and then as you got into later on 2010 and beyond, then mobile. So if you really have the perspective of we start with the customer, where's the customer going? I think you're going to talk about this. That's where they were going. Engaging required you to implement technology strategies from the consumer's perspective. The other thing is the evolution of technology, and as technology and networking continued to evolve, it also became very relevant to how do you take technology to drive efficiencies into the organization in terms of automation. So now we got consumer facing technology into the 21st century. You have more advanced types of technologies, more in the back office. Collectively, it has become really a critical part of the business operations. Prior to that, IT and tech was more of a back office type of utility. But today and in the 21st century, it's critical to any business.
So hard to imagine a business really growing successfully in this century without that being woven into it. You make that point well. I think really closely associated with that is the third point that we would hope people would take away from having participated in these podcasts here in the last few weeks, Craig. That would be, just as you kind of set the stage for it in your observations a moment ago, that is that the utilization of the technology in building the brand experience, the technology needs to be genuinely woven into the customer engagement with your brand or the experience with your brand. And if it's simply something standalone and not enhancing the experience, and given the distribution and the utilization of technology by consumers broadly, it is an enormous missed opportunity for a brand builder that does not weave it in that genuine sort of way into the brand experience. Any observations on that? Is it? I think about our industry, meaning the industry I came up through, which is food service, quick service restaurants. And the idea that you would mostly use it for a ordering system or a point system or loyalty, which seems to me to kind of only be halfway to the opportunity you have there to weave it into the customer experience. But Craig, what are your thoughts there?
The framework or the formula I typically use, which again is universal to any business, starts with sales and profit. And if we put it in the context of Sonic, food service, really retail in general, we simplify it in terms of how can technology drive top line sales, bottom line efficiencies. And in food service and Sonic, we really focused on three measures: traffic, check, and frequency. On the bottom line, it was predominantly, labor and inventory management. So simplifying it to what are the business drivers we were really, trying to improve, that led us to the opportunities of how to leverage technology. So if we focus on the customer, we looked at all the ways that we could drive traffic, check, and frequency. And because of the evolution of mobile and web, this is where consumers were spending a lot of time. It wasn't a replacement. We had an enormously successful campaign with the two guys. So it wasn't going to replace certainly traditional marketing, but in terms of driving traffic to the brand, the thought we had was how do we leverage this kind of connected experience and technology that would augment traditional marketing and really drive traffic through what a lot of the digital technology allows you to do. Unlike traditional is about 15 seconds, 30 seconds, and you try to have as many impressions as you can. With technology, you could stay connected to the consumer, and a marketing person would say, we want to drive them through the funnel. We want to drive them from awareness of the brand. We want to drive them through consideration and ultimately, come and visit, purchase, and transact. So we looked at how we would augment an amazing campaign on traditional media, how we would then take and engage with the customer with mobile and web, and then how we would pull them in with a seamless experience within the drive-in. So the combination, which was really just amazing, that how far ahead you were in the vision, Cliff, because you had this vision of digital off-lot and off-premise, digital on-lot, and of course the backbone of the restaurant. But in a connected world, you now have the ability to engage and stay connected with the consumer all the way through the experience. And that was fundamentally how we thought about what we had to do to really engage with consumers and drive that top line benefit.
Well, and that I think that in terms of building that integrated customer engagement, those are critical elements that we did build and weave into the brand experience for the customer. There's still opportunity, I think, for each of the brands we work with, but I think about Sonic, there's still tremendous opportunity for Sonic. But nonetheless, the apparatus there for the current owners and management to grab hold of and run with. I'd like to think another takeaway, maybe the fourth of five here in today's discussion, Craig, would be topic on which we held an individual podcast earlier. That has to do with this concept of messy middles, which always present in any project of any kind of scale. The challenge here, for the listener and for the practitioner, you might say, any executive looking to implement something of this complexity, is that the layers of management that are involved, the layers of activity, the tech initiatives and non-tech initiatives, and all these needing to be woven together, really means not just that the complexity is inevitable, but that the messy middles that they're going to experience is even more so inevitable, meaning then that the executive has to keep that type of mind incorporated into their communication with their team, incorporated into their behavior from a management styles and management practices standpoint, and give that credence as they move through whatever implementation, whatever program that they are working on. So hopefully the listener has that understanding pretty well. Your thoughts on the messy middles, Craig?
The messy middles, as you describe it, my experience is probably one of the top 2 or 3 reasons why some of these big initiatives don't succeed. Is because you could build the right technology, you can install it in a kind of isolated way, and then as soon as it begins to impact the way you have to think about the business and run the business, it's change. And now it no longer is a tech-related project, but it is a business strategy, and it impacts. You have to think about marketing differently. You have to think about operations differently. Really, almost all aspects of your business. And I think you constantly kind of define the idea that messy middles. Everyone really likes the excitement up front of a very strategic, exciting type of project. Everyone likes it at the finish line when it succeeds. But in the middle, it gets messy in terms of how you operationalize this for your business. And so the messy middles is really it's kind of a headwind on these big initiatives that sometimes just it's so difficult to get through. And I think it'd be good for us and you to share just what we had no choice, and that you reminded us of that. We had no choice, and getting the entire organization to first think about this, not as a tech project, but this was our strategy. This was our basis of our 2020. We started this when we started building out in 10 years. This is going to be our long-term strategy. And we had a leadership offsite when the messy middle started to it really started to become apparent. And your first conversation with us, the leaders, was first of all acknowledging it's going to be messy, it's not going to be perfect, and that's okay. And so that was that session was the beginning, really getting the organization aligned with it, and finding kind of the resilience and perseverance to drive through what was several years. Ultimately, we did transform the business, and organizationally, certainly as we started to succeed, people got very excited. But it really, to drive through it. It starts with the leaders. It started with you, Cliff, and that was a fantastic turning point. I think that was probably in 2012. We were ready to really start to drive this through our business process.
Well, critical point, and anyone listening to our prior discussion on that and thinking about this in their own business, Craig makes the point. We both make the point about it being applicable anywhere. Craig makes the further point that on most of the steps that we are working on and working together at Sonic, we really had no choice, and in fact, that was the case. The point of sale systems that operators need to implement was to replace an antiquated system that was really limited in time, and both as to the technology in the store, but the relationship with the vendor. And so the replacement, that was essential. Replacement of our own systems, the integration of them, all these things essential. The app with the consumer, not something we could ignore. So we were largely working on projects that we would say to our operators, we have no choice anyway. Let's just weave it together while we're doing this and enhance the customer's experience. That may not be true with many enterprises, those of you listening to this, but it is going to be true in some way, almost certainly, either to be able to keep up with consumers or keep up with the demands of your industry. But well, we did have that good fortune of being able to say that, and so that made the messy middles necessary because we had no choice but to work through it. So that does lead to the fifth takeaway I think we had hoped we could offer here today, Craig, which is we've really attempted to offer a framework here for growth and executing large, complex initiatives that we believe does apply to many, if not most, enterprises. So we've talked about our particular experiences with particular brands and industries, but there is no reason to apply that in a limited way as though it only applies to these companies or to these industries. And Craig's experience is a good deal broader than mine, both as it relates to varied companies and industries, with mine being focused on Sonic. So, Craig, your perspective on that would be interesting to hear, just given the breadth of your experience over the decades.
Yeah, this framework, of course, it's evolved, but I probably really started to embrace and adopt this when I was working for Pepsi. It became really apparent on large enterprises and how to think about strategic growth and technology and the role that technology plays. And so as I became part of the strategy team and how we would apply those technologies, slightly different, but really the same format. And what we're going to walk through here on these points, I could tell you that it was consistent when I moved into the finance industry with Bank of America. It was consistent when I consulted with other industries in pharmaceuticals as well as manufacturing, and certainly here at Sonic and post Sonic with Planet. So it is universal. What changes, the two things that evolve, but still very much the framework is designed to ensure that you're thinking through this. Consumers will change. They evolve. They change. Their needs change, and you've got to learn and understand and change with them. And one quote we use quite often, I think in our book, Cliff, is, I think it was Wayne Gretzky who said, "Good players play where the puck is. Great players, hockey players, play where the puck's going to be." And so it's really important because these technology initiatives they aren't overnight installations. It's important to kind of anticipate where your consumers are going, how to communicate with them more effectively, how to engage with them. Technology, as you stated, plays a major role in that. And so the consumers will evolve. The other thing is technology evolves. New technologies really become available to apply. Those two elements, this framework is designed to continue to evolve as consumers and technology evolve. It also ties directly to just your business model, sales and profit, as we talked about. And that applies to any business. So my experience is I've kind of embraced this framework. I was excited because the first time we met, you pretty much talked about this kind of framework. So I knew that working with you and Sonic was really going to be an amazing experience and part of my journey. But I feel as though it played out. You used it for many years, even prior to me getting there. It played out wonderfully. You continue to remind us whenever we would go off track. You'd continue to remind us about customer differentiation. We're going to talk about these, and how are we driving sales and profit for the operator. And again, I applied it at Planet Fitness very effectively as well. So universal in a lot of ways, and will continue. It's designed to evolve as consumers and technology evolve as well.
So hopefully those are key thoughts, key takeaways that our listeners pull together, having not just listened to today in that synopsis, but over the period of time. So a thought looking forward, and we'll keep pushing out as it relates to topics on future podcasts under this bricks and clicks concept. But Craig, it might be interesting for the listener to, as we would say, how should we be thinking about this? We have that exchange over the years. We've discussed a lot about application of technology in various enterprises. That's been the focus of our discussion. A topic that would probably interest many of our listeners would be how they should be thinking about AI, which is very much the topic these days, but how they should be thinking about it in their business building, brand building initiatives, and the role that's going to be playing. Any thoughts on that, Craig?
Yeah, it's a great question, because that AI, artificial intelligence, is it's kind of irrational exuberance, in my opinion. And it's not unlike the web 25 years ago. It will no doubt be a critical part of any technology strategy. What I would say is to try to simplify it for our listeners, because it's a very broad topic. It's a concept and a technique that's been a computer science technique that's been around. I think the term was coined in the 50s. It has evolved since then. It hasn't always been called AI. At some point, I think in the 70s or 80s, it was called expert systems, rule-based systems, rule engines. You would hear that over the years. But our society has really been experiencing AI as they now consistently refer to it in many aspects of our lives. I actually like referring to AI as opposed to artificial. It's augmented intelligence. It still requires a human to really manage it and ensure that this technology is producing the right results and driving the right outcomes. We see this in airplanes that fly, autopilots. It uses AI algorithms. We see it in cars now. We really see it. We've been seeing it in our society, in our lives for many, many years, just not referred to as AI. If I were to boil it down to what it is, it is a software. It is a software technique, an algorithm technique. Traditionally, software development was built on kind of a fixed instruction logic. AI is really built not on fixed, but a set of rules, and that draws inferences, and it leverages large amounts of data. Does that sound familiar? All systems that use large amounts of data. So it is just an evolution of how to develop algorithms. And the other aspect of it that has become very powerful, it's a learning. The algorithm has the ability to learn. And what that means is the algorithm adapts. The more data it has, the smarter it gets in terms of the subject matter that it's built around. And so the idea that it leverages inferencing rather than kind of fixed instructions, and the idea that it has the ability to learn over time and add rules to the algorithm, that's what's become very powerful. And so applying it is really not unlike any other technology, whether it was mobile, web, any of the technologies that we embraced. Matter of fact, we didn't call it AI, we leveraged it in ICE. And two areas. One was in our food and labor tools. They do predictive analysis. The predictive analysis, it takes 2 years of data typically based on the transactions of your business, and predicts what they think inventory that you may need in terms of ordering.
Right.
And labor
that you're going to need to support the level of business. Yeah.
It's right. It still requires the store manager to validate that.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
The second place where we used it in ICE was we built ICE to be able to start building algorithms around suggestive sell. And so with suggestive sell, it takes history of transactions and consumers, and it creates patterns of the customer ordered X, Y, and Z, they're likely to order A. And so we built that into ICE to be able to, the more we learned about our customers, the more customer data that we could apply to the transactions and leverage that on suggestive sell. Not unlike when you go to Amazon or Netflix and it suggests what you should buy.
Yeah, people who like that like this, right?
Yeah.
People who read that read this.
Point is, it's yet another evolution. It will be very important and very critical to all aspects of business, just like today mobile and web and a network is. But applying it in terms of how to truly leverage it, not get too far ahead of where it's ready to be leveraged in a business, still applies to our framework. You always start with the customer.
Yep.
You continue to innovate that experience in the business. How would you leverage AI to continue to differentiate? And ultimately, you still have to drive profitable sales.
Absolutely. Right. Love that framework. Love that context. Something we practiced for years and something that has continuing applicability. We'll continue to talk about. So, and AI, something that a missed opportunity in terms of the change in control of Sonic, and something that we didn't get to participate in as a result, but something that's an opportunity still for them if they choose to go that path. But Craig, good to be with you again. To our listeners, thanks for listening in again. We'll look forward to next podcast with you related to these issues, a little broader beyond the book of Bricks and Clicks, but related nonetheless. But Craig, good to be with you.
And you too.
We'll look forward to our next session.
This has been Bricks and Clicks from Forbes Books. If you want to learn more about how traditional businesses can evolve, innovate, and lead with the 21st century customer and ever-changing market conditions, go to bricksandclicks.com and click on how to create your digital roadmap.